To Gmat Club. My name's Donna Bowman, and today we are going to discuss some M7 success stories. So we're going to go through, again, clients that we have had at Stratus that have been successful in all of these top programs, go through a little bit about what they did and also some tips for each school. So let me get started with this and basically introduce myself just briefly and a little bit about Stratus, and then we'll jump right in because we've got a lot to cover. So I'm one of the counselors with Stratus. I'm a senior admissions counselor. I have been working at Stratus actually for the last 5 years, working directly with applicants. But prior to that, I was on the admissions side, which also gives me some really interesting insight about how admissions committees make decisions because I have made admissions decisions. I have my MBA from Kellogg. I have my undergraduate degree from UNC Chapel Hill. And the thing that I really enjoy about this work is helping people. I think I'm just always interested in people's stories and in helping people to tell their most authentic story and feel like when they have finished with the application process, they've uncovered every stone, they've sort of left everything on the mat, or it's gone. They've given it their best effort. So I really enjoy working with people and looking forward to talking to you today. So with that, I'm going to share just a teeny bit about Stratus. So again, Stratus is one of the admissions consulting firms that you're probably familiar with on Gmat Club. We're very active. We are working with lots of applicants every year. We have a couple things to let you know about Stratus. We have a team-based approach, which means that when you work with one counselor at Stratus, you are going to get touch points with probably 5 or 6 Stratus professionals at different points in the process because, truth be told, admissions committee decisions are not made by one person. They're always made by many people, and it's really helpful to have different perspectives along the way. So, for example, if you apply with us with 4 schools, and you have, let's say you have Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, Kellogg. For each school, you'll work with your primary counselor, but you'll also then get some input from one of our counselors who's an expert on each specific school to weigh in. So you're going to get some feedback on your Harvard essay from our Harvard counselor, feedback from Wharton essays from a counselor who has experience with Wharton, whether they're former admissions or alum, or just happen to work with a lot of people at that school. So that's something that is baked into our process that is unusual. You don't see it at every firm. And then the other thing that's pretty unique to Stratus is the 4-school guarantee. And that's where if you work with us in round 1 and you are not successful, we're the only firm that actually is on your side to basically give you 2 more schools for free in round 2. And so that can be very helpful to feel like if you shoot really high in round 1 and you're not successful, all that work is not going to go to waste. We'll just pick up and work with you some more. So with that, let me jump into our stories and schools. But I want to give just a little bit of a context of no matter what school and what success, all the top MBA programs are essentially looking for the same things, and they maybe emphasize it in a different way, and they definitely have different cultures and perspectives. But at the end of the day, you've got to show that you have academic and quantitative readiness. And how do you do that? Where did you go to school? What was your major? What was your GPA? What were your test scores? And there are definitely things that you can do, and we'll talk about that in some of these success stories of, if people needed to show more quantitative readiness, maybe they took some courses, or maybe they, addressed it directly with a recommender, whatever. But schools are looking for that. They're looking for your professional experience. They want to know that you've had impact, that you can get things done. So that means they want to know what skills you've developed, how many people you've managed, have you been promoted ahead of your peers, what kind of progression have you had, have you managed budgets, have you managed people, all of those things. So that's important to show, and successful candidates in all these schools are going to show these things. Global exposure, have you had a multinational work assignment? Are you bilingual? Did you do study abroad? Are you the kind of person who can work well with people all over the world. So that's important. Leadership and community involvement. So the leadership, it's inside or outside of work. Have you managed teams, projects? Have you, do you have results to talk about? Have you made an impact in your community or in your work? The recommendations part is also very important. You want to pick your champions. Kirsten Moss, who's the admissions director at Stanford, she talks about when you ask someone for recommendations, asking them, can you give me a great recommendation? And if that person hesitates or can't, then that might be a reason to pick someone else. School research. Everybody needs to, every one of these schools wants to know that you want to be at that school, not that you just flipped through the phone book of, M7 schools and that you're just seeing which ones will let you in. You have to have specific reasons for each school, and you have to do your research. We talk about at Stratus using sort of the 5 C's. So you assess your competitiveness, you make connections at the school, you look at the curriculum, you look at the clubs, you look at the community and the culture. So you need to, successful applicants do all those things. So then with this, we're going to go into success stories, and I'm going to group them in 3s. So we're going to first talk about Harvard, Stanford, Wharton. Then we're going to talk about people who were successful at Kellogg and Booth. And then we're going to talk about Columbia and Sloan and people who were successful there. And then at the end, we'll take questions, and I'll talk a little bit more about how Stratus can help you if that's something you'd like to know. All right, so let me jump into our Harvard, Stanford, Wharton success stories. So this first profile, this is a guy I worked with a couple years ago who is actually, time flies, graduating this year. That's an email that I got from him when he was accepted. So this client, he went to a public Ivy. He did have a really high GPA. I think it was 3.8 plus. His Gmat score was 740. So those are definitely things that, in other words, he was in the profile of, class averages and GMAT, those kinds of things. So he was there, but lots of people are there and they don't get in. So what is it that he did that I think tipped the odds in his favor? So one of the things, he had great work experience. He actually he started in consulting, and then he moved to a strategy role in a top CPG firm. You don't see that many people prior to business school who have worked in a consumer packaged goods company, and he was in kind of a C-suite strategy role. So he was really interacting with C-suite, really trying to look at initiatives that were going to help drive the business. So he just had a really good breadth of experience going in. I think one of the things that, and let me stop there before I go in further. On the screen, you can see Harvard values, first of all, habit of leadership, analytical aptitude, and appetite. So all the stats I mentioned, that shows that. And then engaged community citizenship. So in your essay, in your, what more do we need to know? You want to see that habit of leadership and that engaged community citizenship coming through, and not in a forced way, but in a way that just organically flows. And one of the things that I think helped set him apart was he in his essay, he kind of went into where his drive and passion for CPG came from. It started from the earliest, part of his life in being fascinated and going to the grocery store with his mother and noticing about why something was on a promotion or why not. So he was just someone who seemed to have a lifelong curiosity and interest, and he had a fun way of sharing that, but then also going into sharing how he had been a leader both at work and in his community. He was pretty involved in some nonprofits. Again, all of that flowed in a way that wasn't just kind of like a rehash of his resume, but really humanized him. And I do think that his profile of being someone who had CPG experience, had consulting experience, and then wanted to go back to CPG and really take a leadership role. And I think he was debating between basically product management or just continuing in the ranks of sort of the finance and the CFO track. But that profile of someone who did very well, good undergrad, good grades, good leadership, I think, made him a compelling candidate for Harvard, and he was. And so that's one example. And again, just because I'm saying these things are easier said than done, but it's helpful to keep in mind, again, they're looking for these things that about, the habit of leadership, the engaged community citizenship, which those two things I think come out more in the essays than the analytical aptitude and appetite. That comes out more in some of the stats that you maybe have a little less control over. But so we've got a lot to cover, so I'm going to and I'm going to take questions at the end. So if you do have some questions, jot them down and ask them to me at the end. All right, so our next Stratus client who was successful at Stanford, and Stanford is really, very, very challenging school. The actually acceptance rate for Stanford, and actually I was going to jot down just some of the latest stats for both of these. So last year, Harvard had a 12% acceptance rate, which is actually pretty high compared to some years where it's been, 10% or maybe just under 10%. But anyway, last year they were reporting, at least according to Poets and Quants, a 12% acceptance rate. Stanford has about a 7% acceptance rate last year. And again, that's high because in the past, sometimes they've been as low as 5-point-something%. So it's really hard to get into Stanford. I think that's really important to say up front. But the people, and this is before I get into our success story, the people who get in do a good job of doing 4 things. And this is from, again, Kirsten Moss, who talked about what they're looking for. They want to know what you value. They want to know where you want to go. And it should be a big, ambitious thing. These are, they're looking for people who want to change lives, change organizations, change the world. So you should have big goals. They want to know what kind of impact you've had on your communities. And again, that's not so different than what I mentioned up front, but they really do want to know what kind of impact you've had. You have a chance to do that in your story, and you also have a chance to do that in some of the questions that they ask about your accomplishments. And they want to know how your experiences have shaped your perspectives. So those are the things to keep in mind. And again, they want to know in that what matters most and why. They really want to know the why behind your story. So one of our Stratus clients who was successful, a couple things about him, and this just shows you it's not just about stats and numbers here. It's about doing these things well that I just mentioned. But this guy had a non-Ivy but strong undergraduate experience in humanities. His test score was really below their average. He had a 710 Gmat. And we did advise him to take an MBA math prep course to show his ability to handle quantitative rigor. So again, I talked about, if you don't have it in maybe in your GPA as much as you want, or you don't have as much in your actual test score, there are some things you can try to do to improve your situation. He had a situation where he had worked 3 jobs in less than 4 years. So his work experience was a little bit choppy and didn't have as much of a clear trajectory. And when working with Stratus, we helped him to focus his narrative and understand that all of those choppy jobs actually were really around consulting. And he had a particular, focus on wanting to stay in sales and doing some consulting around software and sales. So we helped him position his work experience so that it wouldn't seem as choppy as he had it when he had originally showed us his resume and sort of had conversations with us. So that was something that he did. He pointed to a vision really of building corporate communities and improving lives as a sales executive in software. So really communicating sort of how he thought lives could change through, having better software. And his everything in his career and in his, narrative was supporting that. So again, that question of what matters most, it's the and why. And so sharing, a little bit more about why he had that interest in software. What was it that so again, this is something, especially Stanford, I feel like that is, it's the school with the lowest odds. I truly think that someone who's going to get into Stanford, there's very little that I think consultants can really even do to help people in this case. But again, helping people avoid maybe, if you're thinking about a golf course, stay on the fairway, really focus in going back to, am I showing what I value? Am I showing where I want to go? And I have big dreams, showing that you've had significant impact and doing it in a way that's humble and engaging and interesting. And that's where I think really strong storytelling, because their prompt is rather open-ended, that's where strong storytelling and strong writing can really make a big difference. So we're going to round out our Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton with Wharton. And this is a quote that I got from a client who was just accepted into Wharton last year. And so Wharton is a little bit more, I would say, I don't want to say formulaic, but their application is a little bit, they're asking for very much clearer direction, I guess, than maybe Harvard and Stanford, in the sense that they really do want to know what your career goals are and how, a little bit about what's informed it, but they really want to know how you are going to utilize the resources of Wharton. So this is where you do have to really do your school research and understand how there are resources at Wharton that are going to help you get where you want to go. And then in SA2, you have to understand what is in the Wharton community enough so that they see how you're going to be able to add value. And that's really important. The client, this particular client, the thing that I think helped her, she had strong grades. She went to a state university. She had good progression in consulting. She has the goal of ultimately being able to innovate and have a global startup around helping women access capital so that they can be successful entrepreneurs. And she really, I think, did a good job in her essays of giving some insight as to how growing up, she saw her own mom struggle in work and saw some of the challenges that women faced as entrepreneurs, and really want to help. So had a mission that I think is something people could feel good about. So I think that helped her. We encouraged her to share specific results in both her extracurriculars and her work. So just continuing to drill down and, how did this matter? She didn't have a lot of time outside of work. Her job was pretty demanding. So one of the things we really helped her to showcase how involvement in work projects that were outside of her regular role. So in other words, showing leadership, but showing leadership within your work in committees and, groups and things like that. So we helped her to do that. She was pretty involved in some STEM initiatives at her firm. And so that also tied into this mission of sort of advancing opportunities for women. So I think that was helpful. The other thing that she did, I just really enjoyed working with her. She was so organized. She stayed on task. She got her applications done ahead of time. And she had acceptances to almost all the schools that she applied to. And I think she got Sloan, I think Tuck, Haas. So she had, she did a lot of things right in every school, but that is something that stands out when I think about her. And again, she did enough research so that she had some specific examples of how she was going to be able to add value into the Wharton community. I also want to say something about Wharton. So their acceptance rate last year was 25%, according to Poets and Quants. I have worked with many clients over the years with Wharton, and I found that they are, her Gmat was pretty high. I think it was 730, but I've seen success with people who have 710 Gmats or 700 Gmats. And I think the people who do a good job of all the things I mentioned, of, saying what their goal is and how Wharton can help them, and really being very specific about how they can add value to the community. I think that they are very holistic, and that you shouldn't let, a particular test score keep you from applying. That, and they have a big enough class that you can kind of, one person's test scores aren't going to, or GPA are not going to set their averages, do too much to them. So I think that you really just, it behooves you to, again, do your research. And then also there's the unique team-based interview, and you really do have to spend some time on that. We at Stratus work with all of our clients that get an interview, and we do kind of a mock session so that they have that opportunity to practice doing that, so that hopefully when they actually do it for real, they're more comfortable with the format and they're really able to shine. And we have pretty good results when people have gotten accepted or gotten invited to interview, that they do pretty well in terms of getting accepted. So that's the first three. Now we're going to keep going and talk about Kellogg and Booth. They're next door neighbors, although there's about an hour between them. At the same time, while there's a lot of similarities, there's certainly some differences between these two schools. And let's go ahead and jump in, and we'll talk about Kellogg first. So Kellogg and Booth, they both hover around low 20% acceptance rate. So as M7 goes, among the better, that's about as good odds as you're going to get, low 20% for M7. It's pretty much that or lower. So I think before I give you an example of a client I worked with just recently, I think for Kellogg, it's really important to look at that Kellogg purpose. It's to educate, equip, and inspire brave leaders who build strong organizations and wisely leverage the power of markets to create lasting value. So they're looking for people who are brave. And what does that mean? It means that when you have your leadership example, that you show that you've taken a risk, that it wasn't just, the leadership wasn't just, oh, my, manager had to go on sick leave and I had to take over. But like I, felt so strongly about something that I was willing to put myself out there, maybe risk my reputation, risk relationships, because I wanted to advocate for a course of action. So they're looking for people who are brave, who take risks. They're looking for people who are engaged, who will build strong organizations that create impact. So, being effective. And then creating lasting value. So not people who are just in it to maybe have a quick fix, but to actually really try to impact an organization over the long term. Kellogg students in general, known for high impact, low ego, having a sense of empathy for people, and people who, and this was a quote from Kate Smith, their admissions director, talking about people who walk into the room and raise the quality of everyone else without making it about themselves. So I think those are really important things to keep in mind as an individual. And this is someone I worked with last year, and I think had a lot. She sent me a really sweet email. And so she did not have great tests. In fact, the example of where I believe in this case, there was no Gmat. It was during that time when there weren't any Gmat. They were allowing people without a Gmat score to apply. And I don't think too many people were accepted without a Gmat score, but this client was one of them. Also, so she didn't have her test scores to show, these things. Her grades, she went to a state university, had, good grades. She had great work experience. She was in a financial leadership rotational program with a big firm, and she was in a position to really, especially with a lot of the things that were going on with COVID, where she was able to help move personnel around to different plants, and actually was able to come up with some creative thinking, and really did have examples of how she was brave. She put herself on the line to kind of figure out a way to get save people's jobs quickly, like figure out a way to move resources from one overutilized plant or a plant that was shut down and find another plant, and get those people working. So she did a great job of having impact and taking risks. We helped her, really, think about how can I succinctly show that kind of impact, and how can I really get into that leadership story. So we helped her there. We also helped her, in terms of what do you value, and giving very clear, because that's the second part of the Kellogg essay. So very clear there, of what does she value, and how has that kind of influenced the things that she's gotten involved in. And so it really, I think we helped her again to alleviate, showing that, through recommenders, that she had the ability, the quantitative ability in her job. She was doing quantitative things. So don't get caught up on, you don't need to find it just in the test score for the Gmat. So again, that was very happy for her, and she is, starting at Kellogg. So the next school is Booth, and Booth. The thing about Booth, whereas Kellogg's curriculum is pretty laid out. I mean, you pretty much have a cohort model where you're taking your courses, with the people in your section. Booth is a lot less structured. So to be successful at Booth, I think you have to have a pretty clear idea of where you want to go, and know what it is that you're looking for, because Booth is, like I said, there's only one required course. So it's important that you understand why you want to go to Booth, and what kinds of things at Booth are going to be helpful. The client that I'm wanting to talk about, he had a very, he wanted to actually make a transition from financial services, sort of risk management, to go into private equity and venture capital. And he knew that there were resources, pre-MBA internships that he could utilize through Booth, and he successfully did that. He actually got a chance to work with a venture capital firm while he was at Booth under direction of Booth faculty. So great resources there to help him make that transition. He did successfully make a transition, and now is working and leveraging his knowledge of sort of risk management and cybersecurity, and actually making VC investments in those kinds of firms. He did have, I would say, the profile, his Gmat score was very high. I believe it was 760. His GPA was strong, not, was within the average for Booth. But again, he really had, I think what helped was he had a vision of where he wanted to go, and how Booth could help him. And what they're looking for, they're looking for, again, academic preparedness, like everyone. I would say the intellectual curiosity is something that is more important. That when we were meeting with the admissions team at Booth, I visit schools in the summer as part of AGAC, where we meet with admissions team members and listen to what they're talking about the school. They talked about a Booth student being bug-eyed for knowledge, and also just wanting to have debate and clash of ideas. So looking for people to engage in spirited exchange. So I think that that's really, important about Booth, and maybe that's a little bit of a compare and contrast. And again, it's not to say that Booth students are loners and Kellogg students are all team players, but that maybe is the nuance of difference, that there's going to be a little bit more of a cohort culture at Kellogg than there would be at Booth, where again, there's only one required course, and you really have to chart your own course a little bit, which means you have to have done. Booth wants to see that you've really thought through why you need an MBA, why you want an MBA, and that you are going to be ready to hit the ground running and take advantage of the resources, and you know what kind of clubs you want to get involved in, and you know how you sort of have a vision for how you want your MBA journey to go. So that's some things to keep in mind from Booth. And now we're going to talk about Columbia and MIT Sloan. And there are some unique things about each of them. In terms of admissions, actually, Columbia last year was pretty, they actually went down in their acceptance rate was only 16%. In the past, it has been the year before, I think it was 19%. So definitely competitive. And Sloan, conversely, has had an acceptance rate as low as 11.5% or 12%. And this past year, according to Poets and Quants, they were up at 22%. So they had a little bit more success. But again, none of these M7 schools, you're not going to see 50% acceptance rates in any of these places. So they're all tough to get in. And that's why it's really important, I think, to be nuanced for each school. So let's talk about Columbia. This is a client I worked with a while ago, but the quick email that she sent when she got in, she was someone who actually, I didn't work with her the year before, but she did not get in the first year. I think that's important to know, that if you are not successful the first year in an M7 application, it doesn't mean that you can't get in the next year. So I worked with her on the second try. And with Columbia, actually, they're kind of nice in that you don't actually have to go through all those questions again. You just have to tell them how you've improved. So she had, I believe, a 710 Gmat. Her GPA was within the class average. The thing that she did, and she worked in financial services. She had kind of actually a actuarial background, and she wanted to move into entrepreneurship. And we worked to really show, first of all, how she had improved from the past year. And actually, her Gmat score may have jumped up. That might have been her first attempt. She might have jumped her Gmat up to 730. She did a better job. Like she had some side work that she did outside of the bank, where she was involved in sort of a business of cosmetics, healthcare kind of product that she was working on marketing internationally. And so building out some of the experience and work experience she had from that, which was closer to what she wanted to continue to do post MBA. So being able to show that she had, some relevant work experience that she could build off of to make that transition, which was a pretty big transition away from sort of focusing on actuary for her career. So we helped her to really show, again, results in the area that she was looking to pivot towards. And just showing, again, that she continued to engage, that she understood why Columbia was going to be a great fit for her. She really wanted to be in New York City. And, I think that that's something important. Obviously, Columbia and Stern, but Columbia, being positioned in New York City, where you have access to leaders in every industry, is something that they're very proud of, and that you as an applicant, you need to think about, how will I take advantage of being, at the center of business? Even if they don't ask it exactly that way anymore, there is that sort of why Columbia SA2 question. And so doing a good job of really showing Columbia, you understand how you are going to take advantage of it. And also, Columbia is a school where there is a strong, they want people who want to engage in the culture at Columbia, and not just people who are going to be, off doing all kinds of other things. Of course, COVID has changed it so that there's not as much to go off and do, at least in the short term, but showing that you are going to, elevate your classmates. You're going to leverage, if you have prior relationships in New York City or connections, that maybe you're going to continue to get involved with the same nonprofit and maybe bring that nonprofit into an organization at Columbia. I've seen clients also beyond this particular success story. I've seen clients do that, where they know that they've been involved with a New York City based nonprofit for work if they were based in the city, and that they have specific clubs where they think, oh, well, we could help, this is something we can help this organization and continue. So they have an idea of how they're going to contribute to the culture of Columbia MBA students and activities, and not just take from the city and being always somewhere else in the city, but actually engaging at Columbia. So that's what I want to say about Columbia. And then Sloan, I think that, again, and I had a colleague who talked about Sloan people as being sort of the pirates, the doers. Obviously, with the engineering background that MIT has, Sloan is about invention. It's about ideas made to matter. And really, Sloan wants to know that you have got stuff, you have made things happen, that you've actually done stuff. And they give you, just to emphasize what's highlighted here again, at Sloan, leaders come together to solve the most complex problems and bring solutions out into the world. So in that cover letter, it's really helpful to, rather than, spending so much time saying exactly what you want to do, which they don't care about as much, they want to know that you've done stuff. So, pick 2 areas where you have you've been successful. And the client that I'm, referring to here, we really went through a lot of, challenged her back and forth on, is this, she picked 2 areas where she really did make a difference. She worked in a complex consulting project where she had to manage senior consultants who spoke a different language, and there were some cultural norms that she had to overcome. And yet she showed how she was successful in leading the team, and the team actually got results, were able to generate some new revenue and had some tangible things to point to. So she pointed that out. And she also pointed out how she was able to make a process more efficient. So I would really highly suggest that you have very specific, something, some specific metric. I made something, I saved money, I saved time, I generated revenue, something specific. So you can hit them with 2 examples of, how you've had impact, and then go into a little bit of, maybe how you see yourself engaging at Sloan, or why you're particularly excited about Sloan. But having that is very important. And then in your video, she was then in the video maybe showed a little bit more of the softer side of her, again, things that she liked to do, how she could see herself getting involved in Sloan, getting involved in, really enjoyed hiking, so how she maybe, and winter sports, so how she could be a part of the Sloan community, engaging there. So I think that, again, that's with Sloan, it's really about, kind of getting results and showing that you're the kind of person to get things done, and maybe not as much of the school that wants lots of, context about, why you did or didn't do well in something. They really just want you to show, again, how you're going to have impact, how you're going to work on solving new problems, and that you maybe understand too that it's a very collaborative. So how can you collaborate with other groups at MIT to be successful in reaching your goals? So let's see, in terms of timing, we're about 45 minutes. Let me just say a little bit about how Stratus can help you, and then I'm going to look for questions. Again, it's funny, we're talking about, right now, I'd say, since round 2 is mostly passed, really anybody who's on this today, hopefully you're thinking about round 1, 2021, and it's definitely not too, it's actually a perfect time to actually start working on, all the steps you need to do to be successful, so that you'll be one of those success stories come this fall. Again, we covered this, so again, we have primary counselors. When you work with a primary counselor, you're also going to have a team behind you, a strategist to review your whole profile and debate, which schools are good for you, given your goals, what kinds of recommenders, what's the best people for you to ask based on what's important in your profile. So really just a comprehensive look at you that is team-based, blind reads for every school, a proofreader, 4-school guarantee, all of that. We do have a lot. First of all, you can get a free consult with us at any time. So you can see the link there, Stratus Admissions Counseling.com/consult. So click on, or not click on it, but find that link and you can get a free consult. We can talk about your situation in more detail. We also are doing some upcoming webinars that will be very helpful for those of you applying next year. So uncovering and crafting your story for MBA applications, having a compelling and interesting story and something that really is authentic to you. It's really important for you, everybody, to work on that. And this is something, so that would be a good webinar for that. And some of my colleagues are going to be doing that. And actually, I'm going to be doing the how to use an MBA to pivot or change careers with my colleague, Melissa Prevost. So that's another upcoming webinar on February 9th. So with that, I'm going to maybe stop sharing my screen. Let's see, stop share and click exit. Let's see, end of slide, click exit. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can hopefully see questions that have come up in the chat. So let's see if there's any, lots. Okay, all right. Okay, streaming, let's see, questions. All right, question 1, let's see. Pre-MBA entrepreneurship examples, Gmat versus, well, let me touch on this, GRE versus Gmat. I would say that if you can get a super high Gmat score, then you should. If you are having trouble getting something that's at or above a school's average, the GRE is a very acceptable alternative. And some of clients I have worked with have been successful in M7 with a GRE score, absolutely. So you shouldn't worry about that. And again, now we have this new thing where if you're not successful in the GRE, there is a host of growing schools, some M7s among them, that will also look at the executive assessment. And in my opinion, and this is, take it for what it's worth, but if it was me, I would go in, if I can get the Gmat, I get the Gmat. If I had trouble with the Gmat, I'd try the GRE. If I had trouble with the GRE, I tried the executive assessment for schools that take the executive assessment. And Sloan is taking the executive assessment for full-time MBAs. I think they're the only M7, but Darden, Fuqua, Johnson, I believe. There's a couple others that are, and you can look on the GMAC website to get that. Question here, should letters of recommendation be tailored for each school to reflect the values they look for? I would say no, AJ, that's a great question. Frankly, it's exhausting for your recommenders to have to, and that's part of the reason that schools have adopted a common letter of recommendation. In most cases, or not most, but there are a lot of schools that are on the common letter of recommendation. And there might be perhaps a little bit of flexibility in terms of the word count for some schools, but really most letters of recommendation, it's like in what context do you know the person? So really, there's no reason to change that up. You know, what are their strengths? So really, again, if you have a concern that I'm going to need my recommenders to emphasize my quant, if I feel like in some way that's weaker than I wish, that's going to be probably a case across the board for all the schools. So it's not something I think you need to tailor. There are certain schools where the recommendations are different. So for example, Wharton, they're going to ask the recommenders different questions. They ask, what evidence do you think this person will be successful at Wharton? And what evidence do you think this person will be successful in their career? So your recommender will have to, tailor it in the case where the questions are different. But in the case where it's, how is this person, stand out from others, or how does this person, how have they taken feedback and shown that they grow from that feedback? For those kinds of questions, you don't need anything different. Let's see. How would you suggest tackling the second values essay for Kellogg? Would you use a single story to highlight values, or would you approach it in another way? So that's a great question, Jeff. And I think that, I'm sure you could be successful in either way. I've probably, most of my clients, I would say, probably do something where they maybe talk about, I value two things. Maybe I value, diversity and inclusion, and I value community, and then have a little bit of a story for each of those. But if there's something really, if there's one big story that's really important, or shows that illustrates what's important to you, I think it could work in a single story. I think it's not asked for or absolutely required, but I think that for Kellogg, since they took away the "how will you grow at Kellogg" question, which has now been gone 2 years, but that was your chance in the past to say a little bit about why Kellogg, and they don't really ask why Kellogg, at least not in those two essays. But what you can do is maybe hint at, again, if you value, again, diversity and inclusion, maybe you're going to give a hint after you talk about how it's influenced you to get involved in the activities you talk about. You might share a little bit about how you see yourself continuing to develop that value at Kellogg. So there might be some clubs that you can reference, or something that is a sort of a natural flow. But again, it's not all about why Kellogg. In the video essays, they do ask you a little bit more of like, why is Kellogg the right school for you? So you get a chance to say it there. How early should I start the application process if I want to apply next year? Soccer skills 06. That is a great question, soccer skills 06. Honestly, I think, and I'm available, so if you all want to do consults, I much prefer working with people early and often. And by that, I mean, right now is a great time to get your resume in order, do that introspection to think about what's unique about me. Why do I really need an MBA? What are my key development areas? And the best, it really, to do that well, I think that it's helpful to spend a couple months doing that. And so from now until, say, March or April, this is a great time to do that. So that, and then you can maybe get your resume a little bit more up to date and ready to go and ready for MBA applications, so that, when May and late May and early June comes along and the schools release their new, essay questions, if they're going to change. And I will say M7 schools seem to change their essays less than other schools. So often, like, I would be shocked if Kellogg, or I was going to say Harvard, Stanford, I would be shocked if they change their questions. But anyway, if you've got all this work done, as soon as you know what the question is for that year, then you can jump in and you can be, one of the early ones, and you don't have to feel rushed. And the best essays come when people, it's like a little bit at a time, as opposed to someone who's just like, oh, I'm going to write this whole thing. Nobody writes a good Stanford or Harvard essay in a day. I've never seen it. Never seen it. It's an iterative process, thinking, reflecting. So I would say how early you should start now. And also now is the right time to be doing school research for these schools, because now in the second semester, that's when students are at least have one semester under their belt to talk about. You're going to be able to talk to second years who are almost ready to graduate. So they're going to be able to tell you the whole experience that they had. So you want to do your school research now. So now is the time. Let's see, approximate work experience required. I would say for M7 schools, it's pretty standard that, around 5 years, and I've seen people be successful. I'm sorry that I didn't share those details. They were all my examples were pretty much people who were pretty much in that, like close to the average. So around 5 years of work experience. I've seen people be successful with a little bit more and a little bit less, but I think, 4 or 5 years is a good bench. Would you recommend going into an MBA directly after undergrad or go out and get some work experience? Great question, Anna. Well, and that's a complicated question because the answer is you should absolutely get some work experience. However, there's this rise of something called the Deferred Admit Mba. And so if you're a senior asking this question, you have the unique opportunity to actually apply to some of these M7 and other MBA programs as an undergrad. And so, and then defer for 2 years or so, and then join the program. So for example, Harvard has a 2+2 program. Wharton has a program, Booth has a program, Stanford has this program, Darden. So, and I see Armin's question, so I'll get to that. But so Anna, Yale actually has a unique something called Silver Scholars, where you apply to Yale as a senior and you actually go to Yale and start in with the class with no work experience. But then after a year, they give you basically take some time and get the work experience, and then you finish your MBA. So that's unique, but most of the deferred admit programs, you apply if you're going to do this, and it's a unique opportunity for undergrads. So you apply now, you will then work for 2 or 3 years, but you're going to get mentoring and nurturing with these top schools. And then when you're ready, you just join in the class. So that's an opportunity that has just like mushroomed in the last several years. And I would say anybody who's listening that's a college senior, go ahead. If you want to give it a try, give it a try. I would say that they generally maybe over-index on looking at people who have STEM backgrounds or backgrounds that wouldn't necessarily be on the mainstream MBA track. But you certainly could, if you're a business major and you want to give it a shot, if you are not successful with deferred admit, it's not going to hurt you when you apply again in a couple of years. And if anything, it's just going to give you more insight about what to do. And then Armin, the question of, is work experience at 8 to 9 years too high for M7? I would say no, but I would say that if you have, say, 7 years of work experience, or 8 or 9 years, they want to see that you're not just sort of stalled out, or that you're just kind of continuing, like that there's something, you've had rapid progression, you have a reason why you now feel like, you're sort of now need the MBA. So I do think certainly anybody with, under 10 years of work experience, maybe 9 is sort of, fair game in the mainstream of, maybe not in the mainstream, but in every top all M7 programs, you're going to have people who have that lots of years of work experience. You've got to, again, if you've been working 9 years, the schools can expect more of you. It's not the hint of leadership. You've got to have like real leadership. Like if leadership hasn't emerged and you've been working for 8 or 9 years, why does the school think it's going to magically emerge just because you applied to an MBA program? So more will be expected of you because you've worked more. But if you have the results to share, I think that you could be successful. And then Anna, your follow-up question, when should you take the Gmat GRE? So ideally, and actually, if you're a junior, kudos for you, because I think that it's stressful to apply for these MBA programs at the same time you're studying for the test. I've worked with people who do it, and it's stressful because then they're worrying about holding back on, applying to a program or switching around because they're still waiting for the test to come back. So I think if you can do the GMAT GRE your junior year, so you have time to do that, so that in your senior year, and it's usually in April that those applications are due. And in a couple schools, they have a later round. So I think Darden has an April and an August round. So, but if you spend your senior year just working on applying to those MBA programs, I would say that that's the ideal. But I have seen people, they only found out about it maybe their senior year. So then you just have to maybe, take the GMAT and then, also work on applications at the same time. So Shirag has a question. If I have switched 4 to 5 jobs with a total of 7 years of work experience, will it have a negative implications while applying? So, this is an interesting question. And the short answer is it depends. I mean, I would say, if I saw 5 jobs in 7 years, I would maybe be a little bit red flagged, but the world is changing. And I'd say that people are really taking more jobs and switching more. And if each move that you've made makes sense and gets you closer to your aspiration, or you've specifically wanted to get different kinds of experience because you needed all of that experience to be able to achieve your MBA goal. So it's not absolutely the case that just because you have a lot of jobs that you won't be taken seriously by an M7 or any top program, but you need to explain. So you may have to use your optional essays to explain a little bit more why you made those moves. And again, this year more than ever, maybe one of those moves is because you got laid off. You know what? A lot of people got laid off last year, and it's not your fault. And schools understand that. So also don't worry about hiding it. I would say whatever the reasons are, when in doubt, explain it in the optional essay so that the admissions person is not wondering why. As long as you explain why and how it fits into your overall goal, I think that's fine. And then M7 as a second MBA. So after a premier business school, you have to check, Dimple, on each school, but I would say that M7 schools are probably the less likely to take people who have a second MBA, but it does vary by school. Some will and some will not, and you just have to look. So check with the school before you go into actually applying and finding out that you're not even eligible. And then Pratik has a question: is there any kind of research center is there any kind of research career in management after MBA from M7? Any kind of research career? I'm not quite sure I completely understand your question, but certainly, some people, if you wanted to be a professor, some people teach in all MBA programs, even with just a master's and MBA, maybe they're an adjunct professor. So if that's something that you wanted to do, if you really wanted to jump into a research track, you certainly could get a PhD or maybe extend your MBA and get a PhD after that. So, obviously if you work at a consulting firm, there's a lot of research that you're doing. So that maybe that you're just doing a lot of research in sort of a consulting role. And then Antara, can a school teacher apply for MBA? If so, what should be the specialization to opt for? So absolutely. Actually, and I don't know, Antara, if you did something called Teach for America, but I'd say that I've seen a lot of people successful in Teach for America. When you think about coming out of college and then just jumping in to like teaching, like a classroom and being literally put on the line where you've got all these kids who it can be challenging. So I'd say that business schools have great respect for people who have taught. The specialization, really has to be make sense for your story, right? And what you want to do after an MBA. So I'm thinking of one person that I worked with who had a teaching degree and then was really interested in STEM and actually was doing some STEM teaching and wanted to go into consulting and actually continued work on education and, ed tech. When you say, so his specialization was kind of like ed tech post MBA. So yes, so working in a private school versus don't worry about it. If it's private school, it doesn't matter. The teaching experience is valid. But again, what is there the passion for? It's not just I'm like tired of teaching and I'm going to roll the dice and get my MBA. It's like, okay, maybe I'm really interested in, I've seen the frustrations of teaching or education, and I want to, again, maybe figure out, be part of the disruptive education. So ed tech, what that would be a very, a reasonable story. And I guess the key is it should be what is you care about. If you're interested in, I've seen math teachers say, you know what, I'm really interested in investing and I actually want to, get into investment management. So I'm just going to pivot away from math, but I'm going to leverage my math skills, which will definitely be helpful in a career in investment management. So again, you can say anything you want. Okay, and then Jay has a question now. What are the kinds of internships that you would recommend for someone wanting to get into 2+2 programs? Well, first of all, again, Jay, that depends on what you want to do after, so if you're thinking you want to go into investment banking, then, you should do a investment banking internship. And ideally you have a job as a financial analyst waiting for you. Again, because there's a priority on STEM, maybe it's that you're, doing computer science. And maybe you're going to get a job in computer science. And so, whatever it is, but then, think through how you can, your work experience should support your overall, why do I want an MBA? It should be in something useful. Since most of the universities are offering us Gmat, GRE waiver, what are you suggesting us to appear? If a school is offering you a waiver, you can take it. However, again, just because someone's offering you the waiver, if you can take the Gmat and do well, I think it's going to be beneficial. So in other words, if you could get a, 750, 740, 730 on the Gmat and you apply with it, the school will still be happy to see that. They will still review your application without it. But think about it. There's going to be a whole lot more people who have used the waiver. So it could be still advantageous to you to take the test if you can and if you can do well. If you are not and you're just super strapped and you want to apply and see what happens, I think you can still, I think that you can still count on a full review. But again, it's one of those things. If you have the ability to do well and you have taken the test, give them the score. Due to COVID situation, I lost my job, so now I have 1 year of experience gap. Will it have negative implication? So here's yes and no. I think now 1 year gap is starting to get to be a little bit long. But what the school wants to know is, have you used your time wisely? I have a client actually that I'm working with, and I've been so impressed. He gets an A+ in how he has pivoted. He got laid off from a well-known company that has, think of industries, hospitality, food and beverage have been hit super hard. Nobody's bad if you get laid off in those industries. It's just the way it is. But what he did is he used this time while he was laid off to get more skills. So add new skills, did some volunteering, did some things to help him be more successful in the job search, ended up getting a new job. I think that's, helpful. So again, just make sure you're using your time wisely. And I think that's okay. Is there a benefit to taking the Gmat or the GRE, Josh? Again, if you ask any admissions, if you ask anyone at any of the top schools, I think they would tell you that they're agnostic to the test, that they don't care which one you take. And I think you could take them at their word for that. That being said, the majority of people applying to MBA programs do still take the Gmat, although that seems to be the GRE is rapidly increasing. But, I think if it was me, and you can take that for what it's worth, I think I would take the Gmat first and I would see how I did. And if I was happy with how I did, I would stay there. You can work with someone to see, which test you might be inclined to do better on and just initially go right to that test. That's also perfectly fine. I'm a business major doing my bachelor's in one of the most competitive B schools. top 5 in the country, but my grades are not great, 2.7 on a curve. What are the ways I can make up for it? Well, so Jay, I'd say that in your case, I would say the way you make up for it is you get a great job and you do really well, and you really, that you really do well. Does that mean you can't apply for these deferred admit programs? No, you can't. I mean, you certainly can. You have a hurdle in that GPA. That's not exactly like, oh, we want to lock in the 2.7 guy. There's going to be plenty of opportunities to find the 2.7 guy 3 years later. But if let's say you get a super high Gmat, maybe they want to lock in, the super high Gmat, and they see your potential. But I think probably you're going to need to show that you did well at work. So what I would do is probably focus on making sure I really get a great job and that I really apply myself. And if there is a reason why that your grades aren't so great, I don't know if it's maybe you had a job and it was taking too much time away from school, or you just didn't do well in the beginning of school, but then it got better. You don't want to make excuses, but you might want to give the admissions team, when you apply to schools, context of why your GPA was 2.7. And I will tell you that I have worked with people who have 2.7 GPAs who have gotten into top 10 MBA programs. So it doesn't mean that you're never going to be able to get into top 10 program, but it does mean if you look at the big 3, GMAT or test score, GPA, and work experience, your GPA is going to be a little lower. So the other things, if possible, should be a little higher. And, if you can, retake course and maybe a UCLA or UC Berkeley Haas extension course, and do well in some of those courses, maybe that you didn't do so well in. Okay, which is more important, high GMAT score or good SOP? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the SOP is. So, but I would say if you're talking about GMAT score versus grades, again, it's something that they're all important. And nobody has to be perfect. So I've worked with lots of people who got into M7 schools who weren't perfect, and so if you didn't have something, but if something wasn't as strong, so let's say your GMAT isn't as strong, then maybe your GMAT, like the client I worked with who got into Kellogg without a test score, her GPA was really strong. Her work experience was really strong. Testing wasn't her strength, but the other pieces were really strong. So, if you think about it, 2 out of 3 should probably be strong. All right. Having 7 years experience in sales, what would you recommend? STEM or regular MBA? Well, I would say if you're coming from another country and you want to have the most options for visas and employment and stuff, I can see how a STEM MBA, that's part of the reason there's been such a proliferation of STEM MBA. So but I think it really has more to do with that and what you want to do as to whether or not you do STEM or not. Statement of purpose. Got it. Is what's more important. So I would say they're both important and hard. You know what I mean? It's not like one, and again, if one isn't as good, the other one should be great. So I think that hopefully that helps. I think it's one of these things where, you've got to be strong on all of the things that I talked about. In my first slide, I talked about, go back to that, the schools, and again, the higher you go. So every school, top 50 MBA programs, they want to know that you have academic and quantitative readiness, that you can do the work. They want to know that you've gotten things done and you have good professional experience and that your professional goals make sense for what you want to do after the MBA. They want to know that you have global, exposure and that you're going to know how to deal with people from all over the world. They want to know that you've been involved in your community and that you've been a leader in and outside of your main work roles. They want your recommenders to be really supportive of you and be your champions. And they want to know that you know about the school. So no matter what school you're applying to, you should do those things. Best schools for a career in product roles. I would say, and we're running a little over, so I'm gonna cap this in about just these last couple questions, but product management, So if you don't have experience, Neaton, then I would say look for schools that actually give you experience. So Ross comes to mind because they have so much with their action-based learning and their MAP programs. McCombs has very strong product management training. I'd say any of the, if this is a product, is a tech thing, maybe looking at some of the schools that send a lot of people to the West Coast where there's a lot of tech, or, are on the West Coast. So Anderson, Foster, Haas. How much probability is there for foreign nationals to get a scholarship? There always is, there's more than there used to be on Tara. There's more than there used to be. But to get a scholarship, the people who get scholarships are going to be at the top of, they're going to be among the people who have sort of done everything right. So they're going to have high GMAT scores or test scores. They're going to have high grades. They're going to have great work experience. They're going to be someone that a school says, you know what, we want this person so much because they're going to elevate the class. So that's that. And then what, in your opinion, is the minimum years of work experience required for a successful MBA application? You know what, again, Abhi, there's always exceptions to the rule. So I would say that while the average is 4 or 5 years, I've seen people be successful with 3 years. I've seen people be successful with 2 years. If someone started a company while they were in college and worked significantly in some startups or had some things that they did, and even though it wasn't, it's still college, but that counts as work experience. Or if you did a year-long internship as part of a, work study kind of program, that could also be something that you might be able to lobby to get considered. So anyway, I hope this has been helpful to all of you. I wish you all the best. I would say, again, the fact that we're on this call in January means that you are thinking ahead, and I think that you have plenty of time to research the schools and do all the things that I talked about. So I want to wish you all the best. What about someone with 14 years? That's my last question. Rolando, what I would say, 14 years is you're at that point where there might be an MBA program that will take you as full-time, but you also can look at executive or evening programs, depending on where you live. If you're willing to do, for example, in Chicago, both Kellogg and Booth have excellent evening and weekend MBA programs. And they've changed the format in some cases where, you only have to go to class, every other weekend, or sometimes it's every third weekend. So it's a little bit less draining on your life. That being said, if you really wanted to have an immersive experience, there's also things like Stanford has an MSX program, which is Master of Science Management program, where it is a full-time, it's kind of like an executive MBA, but it's a 1-year full-time on-campus experience. Or Sloan Fellows, again, gives you a full-time experience, but leverages your cohort is going to have more work experience. So you might want to look at some programs like that. All right. I don't know how this ends exactly, but maybe I just leave the studio. But I want to thank you all, wish you all the best of luck, and thank you. Stay safe and healthy, everyone.